And we're live. Hi, everyone. Good evening and good day. Thank you for joining. Hi, Dieter. Hi, Carlos. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Jifat?
I'm great. I'm
Doing
great.
great. Thanks.
So we're gonna wait for. We're gonna give two minutes for people to join, and then we're gonna start. So
Yep, sounds good.
amazing. For a very interesting topic today.
Indeed.
Yeah. Do we? I don't see Carlos. Do you see him, Dieter?
Nope,
No. Okay. So
we lost Carlos,
we lost
but
Carlos.
we're waiting anyway, so it's fine.
Sorry. Yeah, we're waiting a few minutes anyway, and we're gonna let Carlos hear it. Oh, I thought we
There you
lost
go.
you, Carlos.
Yeah, I don't know why I just disconnected, but yeah,
Okay. And do you
No
have
worries.
the slides?
of course. Let me show you here. Got it.
Cool.
Perfect.
Great. So I think we can start. I think we are like 3 minutes in. Cool. So today we have a very interesting and I think very hot topic about how to make FinOps and TCO matter to executive. I think this is we talked about how in 2026 this is going to be one of the main things for the FinOps teams. We lost Carlos again. Let's wait for him again. Sorry about that.
Poor Carlos.
Issues. Let's see, he's coming back. Just this is maybe the time till Carlos is back to let everyone knows that again, feel free to add questions, drop questions, or write in the chat. We will address all the questions at the end. And of course, the webinar will be sent at the end of the event with the recording, so you can watch it also later. And yeah, let's wait for.
Can you hear me?
It's all right, no worries.
Yeah. Let's see that he's back.
One thing that I do is I have my laptop plugged in to power.
Yeah.
So that I don't run out of battery mid-talk.
Yeah, I think it's just a technical issue, yeah. But
right.
Give him another minute. Sorry, everyone. Yeah. Carlos, do you want me to share the screen? I think that could be the case. Okay. Let me share the screen. Let's wait. Or maybe Dieter, you want to share the screen?
I think maybe
I'll do it.
Yeah. And Rick Willer is wondering if the stream is live. Can you check on whatever LinkedIn, YouTube, X, wherever we are streaming?
No, we're not live. We're live on this. This is a private event, so we're not live on LinkedIn.
Okay. Good.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great. So let's start. So we have Dieter here and Carlos, and I'm very excited. And this is a great opportunity to talk to two people that have years and years of experience in FinOps. So we have Dieter that have FinOps experience since 2013, from Google, Netflix, Intuit, Rocco. We have Carlos here, joined FinOps from Just Eat. Again, lots of experience in cloud and in FinOps. Previously worked at AWS and Tenerity. And I'll let you guys take it from here.
Amazing. So, hello everyone. I guess today's topics, all right. So we have this very sort of shiny title: "Stop talking about savings and start talking about growth." And this is something that so what the problem is, Dieter. I think I'm not sure. You've been for longer than I have, but I have been here for the FinOps space for 5 years, which feels like an eternity, even though it's not that not long. But I think it's long enough to see some evolution, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
joined the space when I on a with a in the what you call the cloud economics or cloud financial management team of a cloud services provider. And back then, part of our job was to educate customers on what we were able to do for them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I remember that we had this deck, our first call deck we had with our customers, which was we broke it down the message into 4 pillars, and those were see, save, plan, run, right?
Mm-hmm.
So see, plan, and run. You talk about them, and sometimes you get some nods and whatnot. But whenever we talk about save, you could clearly see, the eyes of the people locking in because they get the message, right? It kind of speaks to their language. So that was back then. I think also during this time, I guess our main deliverable as a team used to be this thing called the the COT, which is the cost optimization tool, which is a very nice
Yeah.
tool, but that was the main thing that we provided. So again, it's
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing the message that I guess that we are a cost optimization, that FinOps is cost optimization, and when the FinOps Foundation came in, it sort of to everything came together in the same way, right? So can you go to the next slide, Yifat? I think that's where we have some of that messaging.
Yeah.
Right. So here, pretty much what we have, I think what we have here is a legacy marketing issue, right? Which is, you try whenever you build something new, like FinOps, you explain it, and because we're humans, we're very easy to label things because it's easy for us to understand the future, and we have this label interface now that we are the cost police. I've heard this term many times in the past, right? Yeah. So and that was what it was, right? And then when I was a practitioner, I remember that one of the key goals that we had to sort of provide as a FinOps service or function was we want to cut 20% cost in cloud. That's it. Very simple. Doesn't matter the usage, doesn't matter anything. It's just cut cost and that's it, right? So there is a legacy, a marketing element. I'm going to stop here talking. I'm going to ask you, Dieter, what do you think? What's happening? Why can't we just is there any way that we can get sort of within the data space of the XX?
Yeah, I mean, it is very true, right? We have been doing cloud financial management or cloud cost optimization for a very long time, right? The inception of cloud was 2006, and the FinOps Foundation was founded in 2019. So there was a lot of cost optimization happening before the official framework was built by the foundation, right? I remember meeting J.R. Stormont at reInvent in 2016. I believe he was still working at Apptio at that time. And he asked me the question, has this cloud financial management legs? And I said, like, yes, because think of the cloud as an industrial kitchen where you have 6, 8 cooks performing during the day. So there will be messes and you need to clean up every day, right? So it is sort of an ongoing discipline. Um, Now, over the years, right, the the messaging of FinOps is actually to bring cost to the forefront of everyone's thinking, right? And the culture shift is actually the important driver behind the scenes. That the engineers are already used to optimizing, maybe for performance, maybe for latency, and so the idea is to make cost another dimension that the engineers need to optimize, right? And so this is where the mission of the FinOps Foundation is to help everyone progress and be better in the cloud.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think also what happens, what I've seen is that the executives sometimes whatever they're thinking, they're thinking about optimizing for margins, for scale, for trade-offs, especially now with the AI coming in as a new cost, changing the cost dynamics. Um, and then, so that's what matters to them, right? Which obviously that's why cost was very appealing at that time when we started sort of the journey of the FinOps. But then how do they make decisions? Executives need to make decisions based on tested facts, right? Usually opinions, they quickly lose trust. I used to work in consulting, and if you were unable to defend any sort of important sort of comment or anything that you would produce, obviously you would lose trust, and that's pretty much the end of the career. So execs, even though they don't work in consulting, is pretty much the same. So they have the same pressure. And in a number of different industries, it's always been the search of how can we actually find that data to make better decisions, right? That's what we call the data-driven decision making. So guess what? What sort of a space in the world is sitting on such a huge amount of data to make sense of the world, right? So that is one big sort of a benefit or strength, that sometimes we underestimate, but maybe that's one way to actually get to the heart of the problem, right?
And if I may add, right, for executives, when you look at the big picture, right, let's say you take your total annual revenue and you look at what are you spending your revenue at, right? Typically, and this is true for like Google, Meta, um, any of these types of companies, right? That about 50% of your revenue is spent on headcount, just people, employees, right? And then about a sixth is spent on physical offices and the maintenance and security and landscaping and cafeteria and janitorial, those kind of things, right? Then another sixth of your revenue is spent on sales and marketing, things that help you grow your customer base, those kind of things, right? So you really are stuck with one sixth of your entire revenue that is used on the cloud spend, on the innovation that is happening within your organization, and that is true for most of the businesses around the globe, right? That you have that small sliver that drives the innovation around the planet, right? And so when you think yourself as an executive, right, your cloud spend, that may be just a small line item, right? It's a substantial, but in the big picture of things, it may be just a small line item, and you just take it as an operational expense, right? You don't care more or less than that, right? It's just another line item on how your organization spends the revenue. And so to go from that and have that insight that, what, actually we can substantially reduce that spend, which then frees up resources that you can pour into other initiatives like innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, obviously, that's one of the good ways to think about it. Is having obviously available the data to be able to do that and just sort of to show your examples, right? I would like to, I guess, at this stage, move into a practical example of things that I've seen in the past work, or of things that you actually can use to leverage the amount of data you have to actually produce something other than say we're going to reduce cost, right? So back in the days when I was starting in FinOps, I read obviously the Cloud FinOps book, as anyone would have done, or I'm guessing a lot of people, would have done. And one of the things that struck me the most was the concept of unit economics, right? They call it back then, it's the nirvana of FinOps or something like that. And obviously, at that point, I was like, wow, this is obvious. But once you started to implement this in the real world, you realize that even though cloud cost is variable and depends on business units that are driving that spend, usually that dependency is more complicated than what it seems, right? So usually these workloads, they depend, or the behavior of those workloads, they depend on multiple entries and multiple sort of call it the units of business. Can be number of customers, a number of transactions, number of tokens utilized, like that sort of thing, right? So you need to be able to one practical way to actually put this into practice, I guess, is being able to do some sort of you can think of correlation obviously between all these inputs of these business inputs with your cloud spend, and try to find a classic linear regression exercise. That makes sense, right? So the same way that that realtors, they use this to actually price items based on the number of bedrooms and the size of the square meters and the location and stuff. So it's the same thing used on using instead of those categories, you would use all the business inputs that you think have any sort of input. And obviously those with the highest correlation can help you to build a model that makes sense, that is more robust. And once you have that model, then obviously what you can do is, for example, use something that as a Monte Carlo simulation, right? So for those of you who don't know, is this just Monte Carlo simulation is a way for you to leverage a model that has an output that depends on some inputs, which is exactly the linear regression that you can do with these workloads. But then acknowledge that these inputs will behave in a certain way, in a range. So it's not like we cannot say we think we're going to have, I don't know, 10,000 customers next month, or you have to be a bit more give more sort of flexibility, so you can think about things as having a normalized distribution and using those probabilistic distributions as entry points into your model, because then at the end you will end up with a more robust definition of what the spend could look like. So all the science that that may be talking, the idea is, what can you do with this? You can go to Exec and say, what, if we invest this much in this feature, we expect that is going to maybe potentially increase revenue by this, or margins by this much if we charge each unit at this cost, right? Because we obviously FinOps, we know cost, so we can our goal in a way is to tie cost to revenue. So that's one way to actually do that, right? So that's a very powerful thing. It's not easy to do, but it's one way obviously to make sure to leverage that the power of the data that sits for FinOps teams. What were you thinking in your experience? What do you think about that, Dieter?
Yeah, I mean, unit economics was, especially I think in the first book, it was sort of looked at as the holy grail of FinOps, right? Once you figure out unit economics, this will help you immensely. And I want to deep dive on that a little bit. Since then, I think the FinOps Foundation has realized the challenges and also maybe deprioritized it a little bit, right? But unit economics can still be greatly helpful to your organization, right? The challenge here is that while your cloud bill is available on, let's say, an hourly basis, so it's fairly accurate, right? It's fairly relevant and new. Your business KPIs, key performance indicators, may be created spreadsheets, right? And that cadence may be much slower than your cloud bill, right? So maybe the business builds the business KPIs a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, right? And so being able to combine your cloud cost with business KPI in an automated fashion is a challenge, right? Because whatever was done manually now has to be done, it has to be at least exposed some way for the automation to be able to leverage that, right? There are some technical unit economics or KPIs that you can track, which is, for example, cost per vCPU hour. And ideally, this should be trending down over time as your engineers use cheaper compute options in the cloud, right? They choose cheaper options. And the same is with cost per gigabyte stored, right? Ideally, it should trend down as the engineers choose cheaper storage options, right? Maybe colder storage options that for infrequently accessed data. A very generic business KPI is cloud cost per revenue, right? So at some point you have your revenue, especially if you like a publicly traded company that has to be available to the street, right? And so that cadence is fairly frequent. And again, your cloud bill, you don't have a problem with that cadence. That is essentially available in almost in real time for the most part, right? And so the cloud spend per revenue A healthy median is around 4%, right? Depending on your business,
Mm,
some is, but of course, you mentioned like a real estate agency will have a different business model to like a Nike or a Starbucks or a Target and those kind of things, right? If you percentage is higher, then you are less efficient, and if it is lower, then you are more efficient, right? So around 4% is a healthy median for that one. There are some business KPIs that you can build on top of that. For example, at Roku, we use cost per streaming hour, right? And we
mm,
track that over time. We have other KPIs, cost per active accounts, right? And cost per operating system build, because there's different players, right? And there's older players that have older operating systems that cannot be upgraded because that device is like 5, 10 years old, right? So there is a suite of operating systems that has to be maintained by my organization. And so cost per operating system is another KPI, right? You can build those KPIs and then you can track them over time. For example, when we saw that our cloud bill was essentially doubling year over year,
mm.
uh, the CFO came and said, like, this is unsustainable, because at some point we will spend more on cloud than our revenue is. We need to do something to curb that, right? And a mandate was established to keep the cost per streaming hour at a specific rate and flat over time. That doesn't mean that our cloud spend is not increasing. It is increasing, but it is increasing with the streaming hours that we serve to our customers. Right?
Mm.
So our overall cloud bill is still increasing, but not doubling every year, right? And the cost per streaming hour stays flat. So there is value in this, and there is um, a lot of power and strength in these KPIs, but it is challenging to build them, and you need to track them over time, and you need to hold engineering leaders accountable for it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very, very insightful way to put it. Absolutely. Obviously, we can put the next slide. You will see. I guess the main point, I guess, we're trying to put here is, we're not building just fancy models. We're trying to propose the idea of using the more advanced using economics for this. It's much more that trying to answer those board level questions with defensible math. I think that's the key message here. I guess, what's your experience, Dieter, within the world of AI? I think now that it's becoming more, almost a requirement to for companies to invest in AI. So, do you think that do we have the same level of capabilities to influence executive leadership decisions based on us being able to see data from AI spend and whatnot?
Yeah, and there's several factors that I've seen over the last 2 years, right? I mean, the large language models is still a relatively new technology. We are still struggling with context windows, with memory, and with hallucinations, right?
Mm,
But I saw a lot of experimentation happening over the last 2, 3 years, and now we see actual production applications, right? And obviously, one of the first production applications was to have bots help with support, right? Instead of talking to a human being, maybe you have a simple question like, my player is stuck. How do I unstuck it? Well, have you tried powering it off and powering it on again, right? The typical thing, right? But I have seen now use cases, and there's a lot of different
mm,
um, production applications of AI now. One is that you can ask, so on the screen you have like some movie, right? And you can ask the large language model a question that is maybe metadata driven, right? Where you say like, hey, is this movie suitable for children under the age of 13? So that is something that is relatively simple to answer because it's stored in the metadata, right? But you can ask more complex questions like, can you recommend me a few movies that are similar but have less violence? And
mm.
that is something that we were not able to do 3 years ago, right? And that's where I see the strength coming of these large language models. Now, when it comes to having what is the value of this AI application, right? I think this goes back to the question: what is the business value of cloud? As you fundamentally, you have your cloud bill, right? It's like 10 million, 100 million, or whatever, right? And so, what is the business value? You could say cloud spent per revenue as a percentage, and that is sort of like a proxy KPI. But there's other KPIs that you can look at. For example, in uh, in that scenario where you ask, hey, recommend some similar movies that have less violence in them, right? Um, we do we have testing groups, right? So there is a cohort of users that are testing that, and we essentially have net promoter score surveys or NPS surveys, right? Where we ask the users to rate their experience, and the survey is very extensive, right? They get paid for that, so it's not something that is a three-question thing, right? It's a very extensive, but that survey allows us then to make predictions on what that behavior would be using that new feature, right? And one of the behaviors is, would it attract more customers, right? And another behavior is a person that is using this feature, how likely are they to use this feature regularly, right? And out of that, we can then forecast how likely is that person to stay on platform rather than go to some other product, right? There's lots of competitors in the market, right? So there's other products, other vendors that people can choose, right? So and that is the retention value, right? And then if something doesn't work really well, right? What is the churn, right? Which is the opposite of retention. How many people say like, hey, this is too complex. I don't want to deal with this. Um, you know, give me some simpler user interface or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like it's not only about being able to, like we were saying before, connecting those business inputs into cost inputs that can help you to predict margin, but it's also being able to connect the value of things like AI and cloud in general with those more business concepts like customer retention. I think there's a customer lifetime value, which is a
Yeah,
very useful
yeah.
one. So that could definitely fit in there. But it's kind of, you have to work as a Babel tower in a way, right? So being able to
Mhm.
speak both languages, and we'll see that when we talk about what to do next, giving you a hint. But that's one of the things, right? It's obviously which is why it's not an easy thing, right? To find people and teams that can actually move forward initiatives like this. That's
Mhm.
definitely true. Okay, that sounds good. I guess looking at time, I'm just thinking maybe why don't we give some tips? So you always have this magical three, right? It's a very easy thing to remember. And what can you do today, right? To think about this, right? So I can go with the first one. And obviously, education is important, especially in the world of technology, where things are, moving at a very fast pace. I did my first AWS certifications maybe in 2021 or 2020. So now I look at what I learned, and it just feels like ancient history. So it's being able to just move forward fast. So that means, but also having a balance, right? So being able
Mhm.
to the Babel tower between the XX and the FinOps involves having a little bit. Doesn't matter where you come from. You can come from finance, you can come from engineering, but it's just finding a way to bridge to the other side if you come from more from one side, right? And again, things like technical knowledge, right? So we have the things like cloud fundamentals, architecture, the principles of AI, tokenization, all these things to help you. Like, what are the things that are actually driving cloud spend and cloud value, obviously, ultimately. But also, once you have that information, then how can you actually talk to execs, in their language, and obviously, we're not asking people to do an MBA or anything like that, but it's just something, it's something simple, fundamentals, like things like, the difference between fixed and variable costs, which is a phenomenon that you see on the cloud all the
Mhm.
time, and it's fundamental. Also, the contribution margin, for like, how much money am I putting in my pocket every single transaction that I do, also super important to know. And also, if you want to really give that sort of long-term view of value, things like net present value, very simple concept, but that's something that execs, again, they understand and they appreciate, right? So I guess that's one way to do it. Next one, I'll leave it to Dieter. He's the expert here.
So I actually wanted to mention something about, because you said certifications, right? I think certifications are immensely important, right? Not just with the cloud provider, but also the various FinOps certifications that one can achieve, right? Because it not only communicates to a potential employer that, yeah, you passed that certification, right? So you have that foundation knowledge. But that is something that when I was working at Intuit, we migrated from 26 data centers into the cloud, right? And there were people that were highly successful, essentially their entire career. They started maybe working for that organization when they were 25, and then when they were in the mid 30s, they had kids, a family, and they were highly successful, and now they all of a sudden had to perform in a completely different environment, right? The cloud. And things in the cloud are very different, right? For example, just recently, we had an engineer that wanted to save money on storage. So they enacted a data lifecycle policy to move a blob storage or objects to a colder storage, cheaper storage tier, right? What the engineer did not know that there is a transition cost of 2 cents per 1,000 objects, not 1,000 gigabytes, but 1,000 objects. That engineer moved 4.4 billion objects, which resulted in a bill of $88,000, right? And I can guarantee you, if that person would have asked anyone with the knowledge, right, like myself or anyone in my team, right, they would have been aware of that transition cost. So having that certification helps you immensely, right? Not just on the cloud side, but also on the FinOps side. And on the FinOps side, you actually learn how to talk with different personas, right? Personas are a core component of the FinOps framework. And the personas have needs, they have different deliverables, different responsibilities, and being able to communicate with different personas is a FinOps practitioner's bread and butter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think certifications, again, there's so many of them. There's some of them that require more effort than others. And I would definitely recommend, I guess, in when it comes to choosing them, you can maybe focus on one that with a little bit where your heart lies, like what is it that you really kind of enjoy or where you like. So that's especially when the difficult one. So I got, for example, to get to solutions architect professional for AWS. That one took me a long time to get, but it's something that I really wanted to get, because it felt like I was have at least a first understanding from someone coming with no background on the cloud at all, right? So that's how I kind of built a little bit that knowledge, right?
Exactly.
So again, it's just picking your battles in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's
Now,
for
do
us.
you want me to talk about the FinOps Foundation, the executive program? I can just
Yes,
talk
of
a
course,
couple.
obviously. Yeah.
So we do have a program at the FinOps Foundation. I'm actually an ambassador of the foundation, so I do these kinds of things on a regular basis. And you can volunteer one of your executives to go through that executive program, right? Obviously, they should know that you volunteered them. You don't want to volunteer them and they are not aware of that, right? So it should be mutually agreed upon. And then there is a special program where the foundation teaches the executives how to look at the cloud spend, right? What are the easy low-hanging fruit, right? When you look at the tree, there's bigger and smaller fruit, right? And there's some low-hanging and some one that you need a ladder to get to them, right? And so you get taught those principles, right? For example, when we onboarded one of those cloud efficiency vendors, right? In the first week, we found a standby database that was in the same region as the production database. So I reached out to the engineers and they said, oh, you know what, it's just the configuration file, right? The Terraform created it in the same region. instead of in another region, which is what is intentional. So we had this production-sized database that basically didn't have any connections for 90 days, right? And we were able to simply turn it off, and the annual savings was $144,000. Those databases can get big, and expensive. So these types of things, these types of principles are being taught in that course.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, definitely. I think it's not only education for us, but also the education for them, right? So there's a to bridge that gap a little closer. It's like try to help me get walk a little bit here and I'll walk a little bit there. I guess that's the principles of those two for sure. Got it. And I guess the last one recommendation is to always to start small. Start small. It can be a bit overwhelming, especially when we use these terms that you may had never heard. But at the idea is, you want to test hypotheses with a product, with a small feature, with someone in the organization that you belong to, or a sister organization that you have some allies that you can build some alliances with. I think that's the idea, right? Especially if you are like 5, 6, or 7 stages from the CTO. So it can sound overwhelming, but it's definitely a way to get there. I think we also part of that is also be able to gain some visibility. What are the problems actually that are being discussed at that level, right? So it's not difficult to get information. It's always available. It's just that we are not maybe curious enough to find out and to connect with that reality, right? So, and then ideally try to find a way to connect somehow, right? So solving small problems, so then you can get the credibility to start solving bigger problems, hopefully with more people that can help you as well, right? That's how you actually build bigger ways, right? And then obviously in practical terms, that usually involves things like try to sit down on roadmap reviews with the product teams, or in pricing discussions with commercial. It usually helps. Again, this is all about trying to paint in your picture a more wholesome idea of what surrounds you, so then it's easy to connect the dots, right? And I think that's otherwise it's just it's very hard, right? So if you stick to your look at my cost explorer, I'm gonna fall there, right? That's gonna be it, right? So there's more to that. There's more that we can do, all of us, regardless of where we come from, and I think that's it's a very powerful message to. Yeah.
And there's actually more to it too, right? Because when you have that small example, right, that small workload or that small project, you also are building a success story, right? Assuming it is successful. And successes can be celebrated, which is something that is very nice as well, and they should be celebrated in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you can take the team out to dinner, or you can give them like some cool jacket or some merchandise, right? But also it helps you to showcase that across the organization, that success story to others, right? Who may be willing to now volunteer as well, right? Another thing that is important, and the FinOps Foundation had some slides about that in June 2024, that they analyzed when FinOps was introduced to a project before going live in the cloud versus FinOps being introduced to the project at the inception of the project. And there's sort of like where the left shift comes from, right? That paradigm. And the FinOps Foundation found that introducing FinOps later incurs a much higher cost, because architecture decisions have been made that are more difficult to unfurl, to unroll later in the project, right? One such example was that we had a manager that wanted to know over the holidays, how is the mix of types of support cases changing throughout the holidays, in case there is something in there, right? And so they are responsible for their application, and they shifted traffic to a different part of their application. However, that part had monitoring enabled, right? And that monitoring typically was executed 1,400 to 1,800 times a day. And now when they did that change to get better visibility, the monitoring was executed 288,000 times a day, right? Which incurred a $60,000 cost. And so the simple fix for that was to have the query published to a cache, and then the application read the results from a cache, because the data really is not necessary to get it on a per second basis, right? If you do it every minute or every 5 minutes, that is still sufficient to answer that question, right? And to do those changes at the last minute, right, is much more expensive than when you bring FinOps in at the inception of a project.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's part of education for the execs, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Great. So I guess some takeaways from today. Pretty simple, cost optimization, super important still, right? Keeps the lights on. We prefer to pay for people helping to build products and to pay for unnecessary cloud spend. That's for sure. And then that sort of grower FinOps that we're talking about today is what helps you hopefully to tell execs where to invest next, which is the message for today. And then I guess finally, the companies that win will not spend less, right? It's just about they will decide better. And I think that's a message that obviously the FinOps Foundation has trying to stamp for a while now, but it's super important. That's why we keep it here, because it's just it helps to cement, I guess, the message. But yeah.
And the paradigm shift here is, instead of thinking of FinOps as a discipline that helps you to save every dollar possible, think of it as a discipline that helps you to get the most out of every dollar possible.
Absolutely. Very good.
We're almost at the end of the webinar. Thank you, guys. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And let's see if we have some questions. So I see if you chat. Okay. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, right, guys?
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So let's find one. How should FinOps team talk about AI investment when leadership only sees the costs?
I think you talked about a little bit of that Dieter before, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, right, you need to distinguish, is this an experiment, right? So there is no revenue anticipated from this, right? It's a proof of concept. You want to see if something is working or not, right? For example, at my previous organization, we tested a feature that would find on a receipt what is the total, so that it can be scanned automatically from, just using your phone and be put into QuickBooks, right? And funny as it is, the last number on a receipt is not always the correct total, right? If you are buying things like lumber or something like that, right? There is like taxes in that area and other things. So we did a proof of concept, right? We built something, and I think it was like 4,800 a month to run this thing. And once we saw that, it does actually a good job in like 96% of the use cases, right? We decided, hey, you know what? We want to productionalize that. And then when we productionalized it, we actually cut cost by more than 10x, right? The quality went a little bit down, right, to like maybe 92%, but for the vast majority of use cases, it was very usable, right? So distinguish between if it is an experiment, a proof of concept, or if it's productionalized.
Amazing. Do we have time for one more?
Sure, let's do one more.
One last one, and that's it. So at what point does cost optimization stop being enough and become a blocker to better decisions? We talked about it in the beginning. Yeah.
Stop being enough. Well, it is never enough, I would say. Let's start with that. I think we want more of it, for sure. And the more different types of cost start to appear, the more sort of sources of cost optimization become obviously
True.
important, right? That's it's not only the idle resources, the right sizing. There's always more and more, especially like how to actually optimize. It's not only like changing configuration. It's also how to use architectures in general, right? That's the more complex sort of technologies we start using for sure. But so it's never enough. But then obviously the next that's the whole point that we're having this webinar today here is like, hey, there's more than we can do, right? I think we underestimate the power of what the FinOps practice can actually have on any type of organization. I would say that obviously the more important cloud spend is to the cost of serve a transaction in a company, obviously the more power you have, definitely. But it's just, again, it's one of those practices that has a significant amount of data to play with. And when I say to play with, is because we have so many things that we can test and correlate, and theories to try to prove, and then obviously the idea is to eventually get in that sort of exec level decision making process for sure.
One of the things when you look at cost optimization is you will have a curve that is an exponential degradation curve, right? So about 80% of your dollars will be in 20% of the effort. And then you have 20% of your savings dollars in 80% of the effort, right? And this is where you will have to start looking at automation. Because I can't ask an engineer to investigate something that is $20 an hour, right? $50 an hour, something like that, right? Because an engineer has a value too, right? As a FinOps ambassador, I work with other organizations as well. I do consulting and I help other organizations. And so one of the organizations that I help, they calculated what is the cost of an internal ticket. I believe they use Jira, right? So you open Jira tickets and you get work done this way, right? And they determined that on average it's $17,000, right? So if your automation is, I take 80% of the cases that are worth 20% of the dollars and I create Jira tickets, you will just create tech debt, right? That is not the way to address this issue. The automation actually has to perform the cleanup, right? The waste reduction. And you're absolutely right. When I started at Intuit, we started with, we call it waste sensors. Those are little scripts that surface like orphaned resources or underutilized or not utilized at all resources, right? 6 waste sensors. And we had about 24% waste, right? Which is not surprising because we did the lift and shift from the data center into the cloud. So you do t-shirt sizes, right? Small, medium, large, and you just move to the cloud as quickly as you can. Because you can optimize easier in the cloud than in the data center, right? In the cloud, you can always get smaller virtual machines or larger virtual machines if needed, or more or less, right? Have scaling rules, all those kind of things. So, and then over the course of 4 years, we increased this to 34 waste sensors. So there were like more esoteric things, right? Like unattached IP addresses that incur a cost, right? And we reduced the waste to under 5%, right? So from 24% cloud waste to 4% or less, right? Now that said, the argument could be made: this is good enough. Let's stop with FinOps. But I think the cause is still that the engineers create messes, right, on a daily basis. May it be that there is a training gap, right, or a design and architecture that needs to be changed, right? And so we get cost anomalies in the cloud every day at my current organization, right? And they have to be investigated. And some of them are very esoteric, and the engineers have trouble finding the root cause, right? Because the cloud is a very complex environment.
Cool. Thank you, guys. I think we're running out of time. It was a pleasure. I want to say a big thank you to Dieter and Carlos for joining us today. And again, like I said, yeah, this is going to be uploaded to our website. We're going to send the link after the webinar. So have a great
Sounds
day.
good. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.